Hey friends, this is Pastor Joe from Southwest Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I want to share a discipleship thoughts video for our past Sunday's message for Sunday, May 14th. And if you remember, we talked about the Apostle Paul on Mars Hill in the city of Athens. This is from Acts chapter 17, and the apostle has seen all the idols in the city, even a statue dedicated to the unknown God. And so Paul wants to talk about these things, first in the synagogues, then in the marketplaces, and finally he's taken to a meeting of the Areopagus on Mars Hill. And as we talked about, the Areopagus was actually it was a trial. And so Paul himself is on trial. They're asking, is Paul disrespecting our gods? And so Paul, they're wanting him to give a defense of himself. But Paul does a really cool thing in that message. What Paul does is, instead of letting himself be the one on trial, Paul first, he kind of masterfully interprets his message so that he is teaching the people of Athens about gods they already have worshipped even without knowing. He says this unknown God you worship is in fact the true God, and that this true God has made himself known through Jesus, who died on the cross and rose from the dead. Now Paul, what he does by saying things in this way is he makes it so that he himself is not the one on trial. But instead, Paul puts Jesus on trial. And Paul can do that confidently when people are questioning his faith and what he believes and whether or not his religion is the true religion. Paul is happy to put Jesus on trial because, as Paul himself says, that God has proved Jesus by raising him from the dead. And the same is true for us today. Whenever we have questions or conversations about our faith, the temptation for us is to let ourselves be the one on trial. And the world around us will often want to look at us, our lives, our actions, our behaviors, the outcomes of our projects and things like that. And they're not asking questions about whether or not Jesus is truly the Savior and Son of God. The questions the world wants to ask is, how's the church doing? And now this is understandable. It's rightly so. But we know we're sinful people. We're never really going to fully live out our desires to follow Jesus, to represent him well. We're never going to have that just kind of moral perfection that Jesus has. And this means for us is that when people want to question the church, when people want to question the lives of Christians, that's you and me, the better way for us to go about this is not to be ourselves the ones on trial, but to ask those people, put Jesus on trial, right? Let him give the proof of who he is, because Jesus has. He's proven himself by rising from the dead. He's proven himself through the historical evidences for the truth of the New Testament stories and the historicity of the Christian faith. We can be confident that Jesus is the real deal. And so this is all good news for you and me. Now, the questions we always ask is, if that's what Jesus is teaching us, is that Jesus himself can be the one on trial because Jesus can handle it, then what do we do about it, right? How do we live our lives in response? And what we talked about on Sunday is that if we want to live our lives in response to the good news that Jesus can handle being on trial, well, then what we want to do is we want to live our lives in such a way that points people to Jesus. And this doesn't just mean going out and doing evangelism, although that's a fine way to do it, but we can also think about how we live our lives well as Christians, in our everyday lives, in all of our vocations. We can pursue beauty, right? Because Jesus created us to be beautiful. And when we pursue art, when we pursue Christian creativity, and we just do beautiful things as the people of God, what we're actually doing is we're helping people learn to long for the beauty that God created us to experience. In the same way, we can have meaning and purpose in our lives. And when we ourselves have meaning in our lives at work, at home, in our neighborhoods and communities, when we are here for a reason and we're not just hanging out existing, but we have a purpose, which again is the mission of God for us, the purpose that God put into us as his creatures. Well, when we have a purpose, we help our neighbors learn to long for meaning and purpose in their lives. These things will point them to Jesus as a real source of beauty, the real source of truth. And whenever we live righteous lives, good lives, just lives. We help people long for a world made new. Because in the end, that's what Jesus has accomplished. That's what Jesus promises to fulfill on the last day. And that is what we can offer through the gospel. So, we live our lives in such a way that we point people to Jesus. Let people ask the hard questions of Christ. Let people ask whether Jesus really rose from the dead. Jesus has proved himself. And so we can let him do the hard work there. Now, hey, this is what I get from our reading. I would love to hear from you. What do you hear Jesus telling you in that Acts chapter 17 reading as the Apostle Paul goes before the Areopagus on Mars Hill? And as we reflect on what this means for our own lives, how are we going to live in response to it? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Put your thoughts, put your comments, put your questions in those comments down below, and let's have a conversation. So until next time, take care and God bless. Have a great day.